Hello and welcome, students. We are doing R.K. Narayan's novel, The Guide. In my previous session, I gave you the introduction and the significance of the title, and now we will study the characterizations. Characterization of Raju, the Guide. So Raju is a very complex character. He is popularly known as Railway Raju, and he is the central figure in the novel. He is one of the most complex characters of Narayan. In him, we find the craftiness, dishonesty, and credulity, and also the adventurousness and the romantic excesses which sometimes lead him to trouble. And he is also an anti hero, his ordinariness. Raju has nothing heroic about him. Rather, he is an anti hero, a typical Narayan figure, a common man with a touch of uncommon. He is just ordinary, certainly not so great as he is considered to be. He is one of those unformed, shapeless characters who easily take shape, or you can say, take up the suggestions of others, so much so that it may rightly be said that his personality is the product of other people's convictions. He is extremely susceptible to the suggestions of others, and this plasticity of response determines his career and ultimate destiny. That is, he is influenced by the opinions of others and sometimes by the needs of others, and he changes himself according to the needs and the suggestions of others. So he is a born romantic. Raju was born in the lower middle class family of Malgudi. He was a born romantic, and the panorama of life enchanted him. He took immense delight in men and vehicles, boys and dogs, bullock cart rides, games and wanderings. Romantic curiosity impelled him to know the unknown. However, he was not so good at studies, and his father condemned him as clay-headed. And his mother once called him an unmitigated loafer, a boy who was good for nothing and who was sure to come to a bad end. When the railways came to Malgudi, Raju, the romantic, was very thrilled, and it was a pleasure for him to stroll on the station watching the trains as they arrived and departed, and the people they brought to Malgudi. A significant step in his life was taken when his father took a stall on the station and gradually left it to Raju to look after. Raju may not have been a good student, but he was certainly very observant and intelligent, and could acquire much knowledge by glancing at papers, magazines, periodicals, and old books which he stalled, as well as by talking with his customers. That is, though he was not very good in studies, but he was a very good judge of characters of other people, and he knew what the other people wanted. So this is how he progressed and he advanced himself. The secret of his success was the knowledge of human psychology. From a stall keeper, Raju gradually drifted into playing the role of a tourist guide, and his career was determined by his inability to say no to anybody. It was not in his nature, and he knew his customers by their faces and shown them places of interest. As a tourist guide, he knew all the places where exactly a particular thing could be obtained or what suited most at a particular moment. So, whether closeted with a monster like Marco, or the divine creature like Rosie, or the ignorant villagers of Mangala, he was always ready with the answer that would suit the occasion or the person. He had the water diviner's instinct and self confidence, coupled with a delightful nature, which came almost always to his rescue. At the station, he came to be known as Railway Raju, and he was sought out by everyone who wanted advice and directions. So, he says to Velen that it is written on the brow of some that they shall not be left alone, and I am one such. That is, he always attracts people. He cannot live alone. He is very fond of company, and people also like him. He is quite a popular person. He couldn't be left alone because he was left to be a naturally public character, one of those who seem hardly to exist in private. It is a compulsion of such people, perhaps, because they display something latent in all of us, but grossly and extremely, to respond in the way the audience wants. And Raju's answers to his questions at the railway station bear no relation to conviction or reality, but only to the feelings he senses in the questioner. It was inevitable, therefore, that he should become a guide, but a guide with no content in his message, only an attitude determined from outside. He was a guide, and as a guide, a projection of his audience, he was a great success. Tourists from all parts insisted on his services, and whatever he did for them, he did with a certain detachment, not for any private gain, but simply because they asked him. Anything that interested my clients was also my own interest. The question of my own preferences were secondary, and he learned as he earned. He learned as he earned and soon acquired not only intimate knowledge of Malgudi and its surroundings, but also of human nature. Indeed, throughout his career, he shows an amazing understanding of human psychology. As a lover, Raju could have remained a tourist guide but for the arrival of Marco and his fascinating and discontented wife, Rosie. Raju is at once fascinated by her and wins her heart by his sympathy and consideration, as well as his keen interest in her art. And both of them, actually, even Rosie, both of them, they are born romantics. And it is coming together of these two similar temperaments. And she and Raju are two of a kind, and they fall in love at once. Not that there is anything headlong or tumultuous about their affair, which strikes one as being as much a crisis of nerves as of passion. Rather, their relationship, both at the beginning and later, when she breaks off with Marco and comes to live with Raju, appears to be much more one of feeling than sensuality, a temperamental rather than a passionate union. As a model prisoner, when Raju was sentenced for forgery, he went to prison, but Raju turns out to be a model prisoner. He is perfectly happy in jail. He says that now I realize that people generally thought of me as being unsound and worthless, not because I deserved the label, but because they had been seeing me in the wrong place all along. That is, he is so happy in the prison. So to appreciate me, they should have come to the central jail and washed me. That is, he is satisfied wherever he went. Raju responds enthusiastically to the various calls made on him by the prison community, and he becomes the teacher and comforter of the prisoners. That is, he always acts like guide to everyone, whom he could talk out of their blackest moods, the friend of the warders, the personal servant and secretary to the superintendent. He visited all the departments of the prison as a sort of benevolent supervisor, and he worked with pleasure on a vegetable patch in the backyard of the superintendent's home, watched with delight the beans and the cabbages and the brinjals grow, plucked them tenderly, and washed them, polished them with the end of his jail jacket, and arranged them artistically on a tray of woven bamboo and carried them in ceremoniously to the superintendent. That is, he is always willing to do extra work. If this was prison life, he reflected, why didn't more people take it? Yet he was very happy doing the work and serving the superintendent. I felt amused at the thought of the ignorant folk who were so horrified at the thought of a jail. Maybe a man about to be hanged might not have the same view, nor one who had been insubordinate or violent, but Raju was very happy over there. Then let's talk about Raju as a spiritual guide. Though it was by chance, on coming out of jail, Raju is soon called upon to play the role of a saint. Some are born saints, others become saints. But sainthood was thrust upon him. राजू को जबरदस्ती सेंट बना लिया गया था. Therefore, sainthood was thrust upon him. As a matter of fact, there is an unbroken connection between Raju the guide, who lived for others, whose character and activity were a reflection of otherness, and Raju, the ex-jailbird, ex-lover of Rosie, the dancer, the prophet surrounded by devout villagers waiting for a message or a miracle. In each case, he is a projection of what people need. That is, he was always ready to help the people and to act according to the needs of the people. Whatever was required of him, he did that. He is there to be used, a tractable form, prompt to assume any shape that may be required. So extreme a degree of accommodation means that Raju's sincerity consists in being false, and his positive existence in being a vacancy filled by others. And the events leading from the beginning to the conclusion of Raju's career, the links between the guide in the railway station and the Swami in the temple make up a natural, realistic sequence. That is, he always responded to the demands of the people. Out of jail, he takes shelter in a deserted temple on the banks of the river Saryu, near the village called Mangal. And then over there he was found by Velan. And Velan's attitude of submissive respect towards Raju, prompted in part by the temple itself, in part by his own traditional expectations, and in part by Raju's bearing and appearance, is to someone of Raju's character pretty well an explicit and irresistible invitation to assume a manner appropriate to the context. So he took the guise of a holy man, because Velen thought that he was a saint, and he also started taking the role of a saint or a holy man. And since this is a role which in its public features correspond closely to the bias of Raju's nature, he instinctively puts himself into the correct posture and slides smoothly, almost helplessly into the part, and he decides to play the role of a Mahatma as it is expected from him. So he sat at the temple about the time he expected Velen and others to arrive, and he anticipated their arrival with a certain excitement. He composed his gestures to receive them, and then he called the village teacher and cowed him by uttering brilliant aphorisms that he started helping them and guiding the people. So he attained the respect and the love of the village Mangala. Now, his predicament, his situation, he also, by acting according to the demands of the people, he found himself in soup. So, his predicament was the climax of the novel and of Raju's life begins in the middle of the drought when he finds himself accidentally involved through the misunderstanding of an idiot boy in undertaking a total fast as an act of intercession to the gods of the rain. Perhaps accidentally is not the right word, for his own nature is the most positive of the several influences: the drought, the plight of the people, the context of tradition and religion, which force him into this predicament. Raju is horrified at the fix he is in. He hoards his remaining scraps of food and he wants to run away from there. And he also tells Velen the candid story. He tells Velen frankly about his life in a desperate effort to explode the legend about himself, because people started thinking that he is a saint, and he told Velen that he is not a saint, rather he has been jailed and he has come out of jail. But Velen, who is very much of the stuff that disciples are made of, he takes the confession simply as a piece of singular condescension on Raju's part, and then he should address Velen at such length is only one more proof of Raju's goodness and humility. But still, Velen has so much of faith in him that he trusts him that Raju will take up the fast and save the village out of drought. Now, Raju has a spiritual regeneration. Raju finds that he can do nothing but go through the ritual, which also requires him to stand for several hours a day up to his waist in the stream while he prays for rain. Now, at last, his will matches his receptivity. At last, in the end, instead of acting, he actually reaches that spiritual level and his will matches his receptivity. The inner pattern and the outer events flow together. That is, he really attains that spirituality and sainthood. If by avoiding food I should help the trees bloom and the grass grow, why not do it thoroughly? And I started thinking, if while fasting, if I can help the people, if I can help the villagers to bring the rain, then why shouldn't he do it nicely and thoroughly? And for the first time in his life, he was making a personal effort. For the first time, he was learning the thrill of full application outside money and love. He was a very shrewd person. He always worked for money and he also worked for love, of course. But for the first time, he was doing for others as a selfless person. In this way, a spiritual regeneration takes place and Raju becomes a martyr for the good of others. It is now that he rises above his narrow, selfish individualism and identifies himself with the people of Mangal and with humanity as a whole. So, in the end, we find that he is a rogue, a picaro, is thus transformed or metamorphosed into a saint or a savior. He may not have died, but he is certainly regenerated. That is, in the end, when he says that it is raining in the Himalayas and I can still feel the rains at my feet, he just slumps down. But the writer, that is Arkinarine, he leaves the ending open or ambiguous. We don't know whether he died or he survives. So we can say that Raju, in the end, he is totally transformed into a saint. Though this sainthood had been thrust upon him, but he reaches that spirituality which was expected by the others, and he also became receptive of that spirituality and he is regenerated. So I hope you have understood Raju's character, and in the next session we will be doing character of Rosie. Thank you.